In 1860, the American South produced 2/3 of the world's cotton. Pause on that number for a moment, because it contains an entire civilization's worth of consequences. 2/3. Not a plurality, not a majority. A near-total dominance of the single most important industrial raw material on Earth. That one fact explains the American Civil War better than almost any speech, any ideology, any moral argument ever made about it. It explains why Great Britain, a nation that had abolished slavery in its own empire nearly 30 years earlier, still hesitated to condemn the Confederacy. It explains why 4 million enslaved people could not simply be declared free without threatening to unravel the global economy from Manchester to Mumbai. It explains why Confederate leaders stood before their legislatures and announced with complete sincerity that the world would not dare move against them. They had a word for this belief. They called it King Cotton. And for a long, terrible moment in history, they were not wrong. But the story does not start in the American South. It does not start with the plantation, or the gin, or the whip, or the auction block. It does not start in the mills of Lancashire or the counting houses of London. To understand how cotton became a king, you have to go back much further, to a time before empires, before industry, before the very concept of trade as we understand it. You have to go back to a river valley in northwestern India 7,000 years ago, where a small flowering plant grew in the heat and nobody powerful had yet noticed it. Most people think of cotton the way they think of air. It is simply there. It is in your shirt, your jeans, your bedsheets, the bandage on your wound, the currency in your wallet. Yes, most paper money is printed on cotton fiber, not wood pulp. It is the most traded agricultural commodity on the planet. It has been cultivated on every inhabited continent. And yet it moves through modern life almost completely invisible, noticed only when it is absent. That invisibility is not accidental. It is the product of a system, actually, of many systems, layered across 7,000 years, designed to make the labor behind cotton disappear so that the comfort of cotton could be enjoyed without guilt. Every era of human civilization, without exception, has found a new geography and a new underclass to make cotton cheap. Ancient India had its caste hierarchies. Medieval Arab traders had their networks of bonded labor. The British Empire had its colonial extraction machine. The American South had chattel slavery on an industrial scale. And the world today has Bangladesh, Cambodia, and the cotton fields of Uzbekistan, where children are still pulled from school each harvest season to pick by hand. Cotton is not just a fabric. It is a mirror. And what it reflects across 7,000 years is not comfort. It is power. The oldest physical evidence of cotton use comes from the Indus Valley civilization in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India. Archaeological excavations at Mohenjo-Daro, one of the great urban centers of the ancient world, a city of perhaps 40,000 people with running water and planned streets at a time when most of Europe was still building in mud, uncovered cotton fiber fragments dating to around 5000 BC. These were not crude fibers twisted into rope. They were woven. Someone, 7,000 years ago, had taken the raw bolls of the cotton plant, separated the fiber from the seed, spun it into thread, and interlaced that thread into cloth with a level of technical sophistication that implies the practice was already old. This matters because it resets the clock on human ingenuity. Cotton cultivation did not emerge from a single brilliant invention. It emerged from millennia of accumulated agricultural knowledge in a specific ecological zone, the warm, semi-arid river plains of South Asia, where the Gossypium arboreum species of cotton plant grew wild and was gradually domesticated by farmers who understood, through patient generations of observation, exactly what the plant needed. The Indus Valley farmers were not the only ones. Independently, in roughly the same prehistoric period, communities in what is now Peru and Mexico were cultivating entirely different species of cotton, Gossypium barbadense and Gossypium hirsutum, without any contact with South Asia. Cotton was not invented. It was discovered separately by multiple human civilizations who encountered the same plant and recognized the same possibility. For thousands of years, that possibility remained local. Cotton cloth in ancient India was a domestic material used for clothing, for religious ritual, for the wrapping of the dead. The Vedic texts reference cotton. The ancient Egyptians, who had their own linen tradition and regarded it as sacred, encountered cotton through trade and found it curious but inferior to their familiar fiber. When Alexander the Great led his Macedonian army into the Punjab in 326 BC, his soldiers encountered cotton garments for the first time and sent back reports of a remarkable material. Wool, they called it. But wool that grew on trees. The phrase stuck. For centuries, Europeans who had never seen a cotton plant would repeat the legend of the vegetable lamb, a creature half plant, half animal that produced fiber from its fleece while rooted to the earth. The Romans eventually developed a taste for Indian cotton, importing it through the Red Sea trade routes at considerable expense. But even at the height of Roman commerce, cotton was a luxury, a curiosity from the East, available to the wealthy, irrelevant to the daily life of the empire. The world had not yet found a way to make it move. That would require a different civilization, a different trade network, and a different understanding of what cotton could become. The word cotton is Arabic, al-qutn. That linguistic fact is not a minor footnote. It is a record of who took cotton from a regional crop and made it a global commodity. Between roughly the 7th and 13th centuries AD, Arab merchants and scholars operating across a trade network that stretched from the Atlantic coast of Spain to the borders of China became the primary engine of cotton spread across the known world. They did not discover cotton. They industrialized its movement. The Islamic world of the medieval period was, by any serious measure, the most sophisticated commercial civilization on earth. Arab traders had established routes across the Sahara, along the East African coast, through Persia and Central Asia, and across the Indian Ocean that connected producers and consumers across 3 continents. Cotton moved along all of them. Egyptian cotton, cultivated in the Nile Delta with irrigation techniques refined over centuries, began to reach Mediterranean markets in quantities that made it genuinely competitive with wool and linen. Persian and Central Asian cotton, grown in the river valleys of the Oxus and the Euphrates, fed an urban textile industry in cities like Baghdad, Samarkand, and Cairo that employed thousands of weavers, dyers, and merchants. The spinning wheel itself, the technology that would eventually make the Industrial Revolution possible, arrived in Europe not from China, as is sometimes claimed, but through the Islamic world, carried westward along the same trade routes as the cotton it was designed to process. Medieval Europe's encounter with cotton was mediated almost entirely through Arab commerce. The Crusades, whatever their religious justifications, functioned partly as a prolonged and violent engagement with the commercial world of the Islamic Mediterranean. Crusader knights who had spent time in the Levant returned to Europe with a taste for Eastern textiles, lighter than wool, softer than linen, capable of being dyed in colors that Northern European cloth could not achieve. Cotton became aspirational. In the merchant cities of northern Italy, Venice, Genoa, Florence, cotton cloth imported from Egypt and Syria began to appear in the wardrobes of the prosperous classes. Italian merchants, recognizing a market, began to organize their own cotton processing industries, importing raw fiber from the Levant and weaving it in their own workshops. But here is the crucial limitation that defined cotton's world for all of this period. Processing cotton by hand is extraordinarily labor-intensive. To spin enough thread for a single yard of cloth took hours of skilled work. The spinning wheel helped, but only marginally. Cotton was available, it was desirable, it was moving across trade routes on an unprecedented scale. But it remained expensive precisely because it remained handmade. Every yard of cotton cloth in medieval Europe represented dozens of hours of human labor. That labor had a cost. And as long as that cost existed, cotton would remain a fabric for the comfortable rather than a fabric for everyone. The real shift came when that labor equation was broken. When someone found a way to make machines do what human hands had always done. And that someone was not an Arab merchant or an Indian weaver or an Italian banker. That someone was a series of inventors working in the damp, unremarkable mill towns of northern England in the second half of the 18th century, during the period we now call the Industrial Revolution. A phrase so familiar that we have almost forgotten how strange and violent and world-altering the thing itself actually was. To understand what Britain did to cotton, you first have to understand what India had already built. By the early 18th century, the Mughal Empire was, by most credible estimates, the largest producer of cotton textiles in the world. Indian weavers, particularly those in Bengal, Gujarat, and the Coromandel coast, had spent centuries refining techniques of spinning, weaving, and dyeing that produced cloth of a quality European manufacturers could not remotely approach. Muslin from Dhaka was so fine it was described by contemporaries as woven air. It was so sheer that a full sari could be passed through a finger ring. Calico from Calicut and chintz from the Coromandel coast arrived in Europe in the 17th century and immediately destabilized existing textile markets. European consumers wanted Indian cotton. They wanted it badly enough that in 1690 the English wool and linen industries lobbied Parliament to pass the Calico Acts, laws that banned the wearing and use of imported Indian cotton cloth in Britain. That sounds absurd now, but it was a direct admission that Indian textile manufacturing was so superior that it was defeating British domestic industry in its own home market, without tariffs, without subsidies, purely on the merit of the product. The British East India Company, chartered in 1600 and operating in India since the early 17th century, had begun its existence as a trading organization. It bought Indian cloth and sold it in European markets. But over the course of the 18th century, as the company accumulated military power and gradually extended its political control over large portions of the Indian subcontinent, its relationship to Indian cotton manufacturing underwent a fundamental transformation. The company stopped being a buyer of Indian finished goods. It started being an extractor of Indian raw materials. The mechanism was not subtle. Indian weavers were forced through a system of advances, loans made by company agents that could never quite be repaid, into a form of debt bondage that compelled them to sell their cloth to the company at prices set by the company. Simultaneously, British manufactured cotton goods produced by the new machine factories of Lancashire and Yorkshire were admitted into Indian markets at preferential tariffs that made them artificially cheap. The combination was lethal. Bengal alone, which had employed an estimated 25 million weavers in the early 18th century, saw its textile industry systematically destroyed over the following 100 years. The British Governor-General Lord William Bentinck, writing in 1835, noted with bureaucratic detachment that the bones of the cotton weavers are bleaching the plains of India. He was not speaking metaphorically. What Britain had done, with considerable deliberateness, was transform the world's most sophisticated cotton manufacturing economy into a supplier of raw fibre for British factories. India grew the cotton. Britain spun it, wove it, and sold finished cloth back to India and to the rest of the world at a profit. The Industrial Revolution in Lancashire was not built on British ingenuity alone. It was built on the deliberate destruction of Indian industry and on the massive transfer of wealth from the Indian subcontinent to the British Isles that accompanied 300 years of colonial extraction. The machines that made this possible, Hargreaves' spinning jenny of 1764, Arkwright's water frame of 1769, Crompton's spinning mule of 1779, Cartwright's power loom of 1785, are celebrated in British history as monuments to human creativity. And they were creative. But creativity in the service of colonial power is not a neutral fact. Every one of those machines was designed to do what Indian weavers had been doing by hand for centuries, only faster and cheaper, and at a scale that no individual human craftsman could compete with. The spinning jenny did not create the cotton industry. It captured it, and the raw material it needed to run at full capacity. Cotton fiber in quantities that Indian or Egyptian production could not supply would come increasingly from a different continent entirely, grown by a different category of human being entirely. It would come from America, and it would come from slaves. Before 1793, cotton existed in America the way it existed everywhere else in the pre-industrial world, as a crop with potential that nobody had yet fully unlocked. The American South grew it in modest quantities. Planters knew it could be profitable. But there was a problem, and the problem was mechanical. The green seed short staple cotton that grew most abundantly across the southern interior contained seeds that were maddeningly difficult to separate from the fiber by hand. A single enslaved worker, picking seeds out manually, could clean perhaps 1 pound of cotton per day. At that rate, the math of large-scale cotton agriculture simply did not work. Then, in 1793, a 27-year-old Yale graduate named Eli Whitney visited a Georgia plantation and, within 10 days, designed a machine that could do what a human hand could not. The cotton gin, short for engine, used a rotating drum of wire teeth to drag cotton fiber through a mesh too fine for the seeds to pass through. A single gin could clean 50 pounds of cotton per day. The problem of the seed was solved, and in solving it, Whitney did not liberate the American South. He condemned it. The immediate consequence of the cotton gin was not prosperity distributed broadly across Southern society. It was an explosion in the demand for enslaved labor. Because the gin solved only one part of the cotton production process. It mechanized the cleaning. It did nothing to mechanize the planting, the cultivating, the picking, the backbreaking, sun-scorched, blood-drawing labor of the cotton field itself, which remained entirely human, and which remained, in the American South, entirely the labor of enslaved black people. More gins meant more cleaned cotton, meant more market demand, meant more acres under cultivation, meant more bodies needed in the fields. Between 1790 and 1860, the enslaved population of the United States grew from approximately 700,000 to nearly 4 million. The cotton economy consumed human beings at a rate that transatlantic slave trade alone could not sustain. Which is why the American domestic slave trade, the internal buying and selling of enslaved people between states, became one of the most profitable industries in the antebellum South. Families were separated. Children were sold away from mothers. Men were marched in coffles, chained together at the neck, from Virginia and Maryland, where the soil was exhausted, to Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas, where new cotton land was being cleared from the forest. This was not an accident of geography or culture. It was a system. A deliberate, legally protected, economically rationalized system of human bondage organized around the production of a single agricultural commodity. The cotton plantation was not a farm in any ordinary sense. It was a labor extraction machine, engineered to produce maximum output from human beings who had no legal right to their own bodies, their own children, or their own labor. Overseers kept daily picking records for every enslaved worker. Records that show, with disturbing precision, how the required daily quota was steadily increased over time. Using a system of rewards and punishments that modern historians have compared to a performance management system. The whip was not merely a tool of sadism. It was a productivity instrument. By 1860, cotton accounted for nearly 60% of all American exports. The economic value locked inside the bodies of enslaved people in the American South, calculated as the capitalized value of their future labor, exceeded the total value of all the factories, railroads, and banks in the North combined. When Confederate leaders spoke of King Cotton, they were not indulging in romantic metaphor. They were stating an economic reality. The global textile industry, British mills, French mills, New England mills, depended on southern cotton with a dependency so profound that interrupting the supply would cause cascading economic collapse across the industrialized world. The Confederacy's entire diplomatic strategy rested on this dependency. They believed that Britain and France, faced with a shutdown of their cotton industries, would be forced to recognize the Confederate government, break the Union blockade, and effectively guarantee Southern independence. They were wrong. But they were not unreasonable to believe it, because the dependency was real. And nowhere was it more real or more painfully exposed than in the mill towns of northern England in the winter of 1861, when the cotton stopped coming. When the American Civil War began in April 1861 and the Union Navy imposed its blockade on southern ports, the cotton stopped. Not gradually, not partially. It stopped. The last shipments that had been loaded before the blockade began to run out in British warehouses through the summer and autumn of 1861. By the winter of that year, the mills of Lancashire, the industrial heartland of British cotton manufacturing, home to the most concentrated textile industry in the world, began to fall silent. What followed is known in British history as the Lancashire Cotton Famine, and it was exactly as severe as that name implies. By the end of 1862, over 500,000 mill workers in Lancashire were unemployed or on reduced hours. In towns like Preston, Blackburn, Burnley, and Oldham, between a third and a half of the entire working population had no income. Children went without shoes in winter. Families sold their furniture to buy food. The Poor Law Relief System, designed for normal levels of unemployment, buckled under the weight of 500,000 destitute people crowding into relief offices. Contemporary accounts describe queues stretching around entire city blocks in freezing rain. Workers who had been earning wages 3 months earlier now dependent on charity soup kitchens to feed their families. And here is the moment in this story that deserves to be remembered far more than it is. The mill workers of Lancashire knew exactly why the cotton had stopped. They were not uninformed about the American Civil War or about slavery. The British press covered both extensively, and the workers, the very people suffering most directly from the Union blockade, the people whose children were going hungry because Southern cotton was not arriving, organised meetings across Lancashire in which they publicly declared their support for the Union cause and their opposition to slavery. A meeting in Exeter Hall in London, attended by thousands of working-class textile workers, passed resolutions supporting Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln himself wrote a letter to the working people of Manchester, expressing his profound respect for their sacrifice. These were not wealthy idealists making a comfortable moral gesture. These were people choosing to go hungry rather than endorse a system they recognized as monstrous. That fact sits quietly in the historical record, rarely taught, rarely celebrated, and it should embarrass anyone who believes that ordinary people cannot be trusted to make moral choices when those choices are costly. The cotton famine also accelerated something that would reshape the global cotton map entirely. Britain, suddenly aware of the catastrophic danger of depending on a single source for its most critical industrial raw material, began aggressively developing alternative cotton-growing regions. Egypt's Nile Delta, where long staple cotton of exceptional quality had been grown since antiquity, received massive British investment and became a significant supplier within a decade. India, which Britain had spent a century converting from a textile manufacturer into a raw fiber supplier, was pushed to increase cotton cultivation. In Central Asia, the Russian Empire engaged in its own imperial expansion into what is now Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, established cotton plantations in the river valleys of the region using a system of forced cultivation that would, eventually, under Soviet rule, become one of the great ecological disasters in human history. When the Civil War ended in 1865 and American cotton returned to world markets, it did not return under the same conditions. 4 million formerly enslaved people were legally free. The plantation system, as it had existed, was legally abolished, and yet, and this is the pattern that repeats itself throughout cotton's entire history, the labor system adapted rather than collapsed. Sharecropping replaced slavery. Formerly enslaved people lacking land, capital, or legal protection against exploitation found themselves bound to the same land, working the same cotton fields, under contracts that ensured they would remain perpetually indebted to the same planter class. Freedom had been granted. Economic freedom remained as distant as it had ever been. The cotton still had to be picked. And the people who picked it were still, by any honest measure, not free. If you are finding this history as extraordinary as it is disturbing, consider subscribing. This channel exists to tell exactly these stories at exactly this depth for exactly this reason. On the morning of April 24, 2013, a building inspector in Dhaka, Bangladesh, walked through the Rana Plaza commercial complex and noted with alarm the cracks spreading through its structural columns. He recommended evacuation. The banks and shops on the lower floors closed immediately. The garment factories on the upper floors, 5 of them, all producing clothing for Western brands, were ordered to remain open by their managers, who had been told by their clients that an order deadline could not be missed. Workers who refused to enter the building were threatened with the loss of a month's wages. Most of them went in. At 8:57 that morning, the building collapsed. 9 floors became rubble in less than 90 seconds. Of the 3,000 and more workers inside, 1,134 were killed. Most were women. Most were in their 20s. Most were earning between $30 and $40 a month. And in the rubble, rescue workers found labels. Primark, Walmart, Benetton, Mango, the Joe Fresh brand, sold in Canadian supermarkets. These were not obscure companies. These were brands whose shops exist in every major city in the world, whose clothing hangs in wardrobes across Europe and North America, whose seasonal sales draw weekend crowds. Rana Plaza was not an anomaly. It was the visible surface of a system that had been constructed deliberately and efficiently over the preceding 4 decades. The system works like this. Western fashion brands, operating under relentless pressure from shareholders to increase margins and from consumers to lower prices, outsource their manufacturing to countries where labor costs are as low as possible. In the 1970s and 1980s, that meant South Korea and Taiwan. As those economies developed and wages rose, production moved to China. As Chinese wages rose, it moved to Bangladesh, Cambodia, Vietnam, Ethiopia. The logic is always the same. Find the place where human labor is cheapest. Extract maximum productivity from that labor and move on when costs rise. It is the same logic that drove the expansion of American cotton slavery across the Deep South. It is the same logic that drove the British destruction of Indian textile manufacturing. Only the geography changes. The structure is identical. Bangladesh became the world's second largest garment exporter after China. Not because of any particular advantage in skill or technology, but because its workers were among the cheapest on earth, its labor regulations were among the weakest, and its government was among the most willing to suppress union organizing in order to attract foreign investment. The garment industry employs roughly 4 million workers in Bangladesh, approximately 80% of them women, the majority earning wages that international poverty researchers classify as insufficient for basic nutritional needs. The minimum wage for garment workers in Bangladesh, even after increases following the Rana Plaza disaster, remains one of the lowest in the world's garment-producing nations. The cotton those workers handle arrives from its own geography of exploitation. The United States, India, China, and Pakistan are the world's largest cotton producers. American cotton farmers receive approximately $4 billion annually in government subsidies, a figure that artificially suppresses world cotton prices and makes it structurally impossible for farmers in West Africa and Central Asia to compete. In Burkina Faso, Mali, and Benin, countries where cotton farming employs a substantial portion of the rural population, farmers work land their families have cultivated for generations and cannot earn enough to cover their costs because the world price of cotton is held artificially low by American agricultural policy. In Uzbekistan, until very recently, the government mobilized the entire national population for the cotton harvest each autumn. Teachers, doctors, civil servants, university students, in a system of state-organized forced labor that continued, largely unreported in Western media, well into the 21st century. And then there is the water. Cotton is one of the most water-intensive crops on Earth. To produce a single kilogram of cotton fiber requires approximately 10,000 liters of water. A single cotton t-shirt, the kind that sells for $5 at a fast fashion retailer, requires approximately 2,700 liters of water to produce from field to finished garment. The consequences of this thirst are visible from space. The Aral Sea, once the 4th largest lake in the world, fed by Central Asian rivers diverted for Soviet cotton irrigation beginning in the 1960s, had by 2007 shrunk to approximately 10% of its original volume. Fishing villages that once sat on its shores now sit 40 miles from water. The seabed, exposed to the air, releases salt and toxic agricultural residues in dust storms that contaminate soil and water supplies across an enormous region. An entire sea was sacrificed for cotton. The modern fast fashion industry has also created a cotton paradox. Synthetic fibers, polyester, nylon, acrylic, now account for the majority of global fiber production, having overtaken cotton in the 1990s. The fashion industry marketed synthetics as progress, as modernity, as liberation from the limitations of natural fiber. What it did not prominently advertise was that polyester is derived from petroleum, that it does not biodegrade, and that every time a synthetic garment is washed, it releases hundreds of thousands of microscopic plastic fibers into the water supply. Fibers that have now been found in the deepest ocean trenches, in Arctic ice cores, in human blood, in the placentas of unborn children. The attempt to escape cotton's costs created costs of its own that will outlast the civilization that created them. Meanwhile, the volume of clothing produced globally has roughly doubled since the year 2000, while the average number of times a garment is worn before being discarded has fallen by approximately 40%. The fashion industry produces an estimated 92 million tons of textile waste each year. Mountains of discarded clothing, much of it cotton, much of it donated in good faith to charity organizations that cannot distribute it, pile up in the Atacama Desert in Chile, in the markets of Accra in Ghana, in landfill sites across the global south. The West's excess arrives in shipping containers on the shores of countries that did not produce it, to be dealt with by people who did not wear it, as the consequence of an economic system designed from the beginning to externalize its true costs onto those least able to refuse them. 7,000 years. That is the span of this story. From the weavers of Mohenjo-Daro spinning fiber in the heat of the Indus Valley to the women of Dhaka sewing labels into shirts they will never be able to afford, the thread runs without interruption. The crop changes continents. The technology changes beyond recognition. The empires rise and fall. The moral justifications shift and adapt and reinvent themselves with each generation. But the underlying structure, find a place, find a people, make them produce cotton cheaply, take the profit elsewhere, has never fundamentally changed. What changes is the distance. In the age of the American plantation, the consumer and the enslaved worker were in the same country, sometimes on the same road. The violence was visible, or at least visible enough that it eventually became politically intolerable. Today, the distance between the hand that sews and the hand that buys is measured in continents and supply chains and corporate structures of such deliberate complexity that no single person, company, or government can easily be assigned responsibility for the conditions at the bottom. That complexity is not accidental. It is the system working as designed. Cotton did not make the world cruel. The world was already capable of cruelty long before the first bowl was picked. What cotton did, what it has always done, is give that cruelty a market, a supply chain, and a price. It made exploitation scalable. It made it global. It made it, for most of its history, invisible to the people who benefited from it most. You are wearing it right now, in all probability. The question that cotton leaves you with after 7,000 years is not a historical question. It is a present tense one. And it does not have a comfortable answer. If this video changed how you see something you wear every day, subscribe and tell us in the comments which part of this history surprised you most. We cover the hidden stories inside ordinary things, and next time we go somewhere equally unexpected.